Well, I think we should start on time, everybody. Thank you for being present. It's been a great conference up to now, and it's my pleasure to be moderating the session on, and I couldn't commit this to memory, so I'm going to have to read it, how AI, machine learning, and big data are disrupting the drug discovery and development landscape for faster and more accurate lead identification, which I guess is very descriptive, but not necessarily one that trips off your tongue so easily. And it's my pleasure to introduce a really highly esteemed panel here in front of me. And we have Mark Davies, who is the SVP for Informatics at BenevolentAI, Martin-Immanuel Bittner, who's the CEO of Arctoris, Marta Gaia Zanchi, who's from Nina Capital, and Neil Sahota, who's the interim CEO at ACSILabs. Now, I'd like them to give a 2-minute or thereabouts introduction to them, because they're the experts on their own life, and I'm definitely not. And then we'll get into some of the panel discussions. I'm going to leave time at the end for questions, and I'm sure there'll be a lot. But for the time being, I'll hand it over to the panel. And I think I'll hand it over to Marta, as you're the nearest. So off you go, Marta.
Thank you very much, Steve, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm the founder and the managing director of Nina Capital, a very early stage, pre-seed and seed stage focused health technology fund in Barcelona, investing internationally in Europe and in the United States. We have a focus on information technology and digital deep technologies and bioplatforms, as well as some smart medtech devices, all dedicated to healthcare. I'm an electrical engineer by training, trained as a system designer of medical instrumentations, turned academician. I was privileged to stay in Stanford University for nearly 13 years as a member of the faculty and very close to the ecosystem of digital health startups that were gravitating around campus. And shout out to Sebastian right there, who is here with Nina Capital. If you have an interesting startups in health tech, please come and find him.
Hi, everybody. My name is Neil Sahota. The best way to sum myself up is I'm the guy that always takes the path of most resistance. I know it's counterintuitive, but I found that's the best way to learn and actually do disruptive things. And so that put me on this course of a guy that's started off his career as a management consultant with global Fortune 500 companies into this whole AI journey. I was part of the original IBM Watson team. We did the Jeopardy challenge. And then I was the one advocating to build actually ecosystems so that people that understand the pain points and the problems of their industries and their work can actually build not just solutions and products, but actually build ventures or even new business units around them. So today, I actually serve as the United Nations AI advisor. I actually was the co-founder of their AI for Good initiative, as well as their Innovation Factory, which is a program to help social impact entrepreneurs. And I am the interim CEO of ACSILabs, where we're actually using AI, the metaverse, and cognitive science to actually augment human problem solving and creativity to tackle complex problems like climate change and healthcare.
Hi, everyone. My name's Mark Davies. I head up the informatics and data capabilities at BenevolentAI. And for talking about Benevolent, a little bit about myself, my background originally is in genetics, but really sort of focused on how we integrate data in large systems and work for biotechs and academic institutes, and really sort of focus on bringing together those large data resources and how these can be tailored in ways to support drug discovery activities. About 7 years ago, joined BenevolentAI and really sort of initiated and worked with the teams to land on this ambition to really think about how we can bring together all of this biomedical data, all of this information into the hands of our users so they can actually undertake the activities in target identification, in lead optimization and patient stratification. And over the course of the last 6-7 years, we've developed not just this data foundation, but also the Benevolent platform that enables this access to our users. Off the back of this, we've established a very successful portfolio, 20+ programs, actual assets in the clinic and R&D enabling studies at this moment in time. And we're representing over multiple functions and multiple capabilities over 3 sites in the UK, Cambridge, and in the US as well. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Brilliant, very nice to be here. My name is Martin-Immanuel Bittner, and I'm the CEO of Arctoris. We're an Oxford-based company, and we started around 4 years ago with the idea of applying technology to drug discovery. As a company, we use a machine learning-driven approach to small molecule drug design, both in oncology and in neuroscience. And what we do a bit differently compared to other AI companies is that we've built a laboratory that uses robotics and automation in order to generate machine learning-ready data. So there is kind of this very well-known phrase within the ML community, garbage in, garbage out. So if you want to get very good models and very good predictions, what you want is the best possible data that you can feed your models with. So that's kind of the investment in robotics, which then synergizes with our machine learning. My own background is in clinical medicine. So I qualified as a doctor, came to Oxford, did my PhD, then started the company together with my co-founder, who's a chemist by background. So very much kind of several career kind of changes from clinical medicine to research into entrepreneurship, and very glad to be here.
Thanks, Martin. Well, moving on from just what Martin said there is that we are all dealing with data. I imagine everyone's dealing with data in this case. But do you think access to quality data will prove to be the rate limiting step in advancing these sort of approaches? And I don't know who'd like to catch that one first.
I mean, to be fair, I have a very biased view on that because that is kind of the thesis kind of our company is built on. I think what we've seen kind of when looking at drug discovery in general is that development times are extremely long, rates of success are very low, and I think we have to ask ourselves why that is the case. And in many ways, kind of there have been studies being performed that looked at reasons for long development times, look at reasons kind of for why even phase 1, phase 2 trials fail. And oftentimes it can pinpoint towards issues in the laboratory phase where reagents were mislabeled, where experiments were performed differently on different days, where data was inconclusive, because it's extremely difficult for humans to be 100% accurate, 100% precise every single time they do kind of a Western blot or a PCR. And that is the reason why in our mind it's extremely important to use technology for what it's best at, which is to augment humans. It's not about replacing scientists, it's about making sure that scientists can spend their time with very high value activities, thinking, reading, hypothesizing, and deciding on which direction to take, to then leave experiment execution to a machine, which then leads to better data.
I wonder, though, if you have come to the point of diminished returns. There are certainly a lot of clinical indications for which we still don't have enough data. We don't know the biology. We don't know the real-world evidence that our initial therapeutic approaches actually work. So for those areas, I still think that there is a bottleneck in data. But frankly, I see the impediment in this sector to actually demonstrate its full value in the utility that comes with the bringing the hypotheses that the machine learning models are formulating based on that data into a funnel of development and clinical trials. Are we really equipped to be able to handle, if this all turns out actually working correctly, the high volume of hypotheses that we are generating when all of the process downstreams is in fact quite broken? 90% of clinical trials failing, reimbursement entities perhaps not set up to manage the mountain of possibilities that are coming at them in terms of therapeutic options that will become available. So yes, there are still opportunities to build defensible moats around more data. We need more quality data, but I would argue that actually we need to think about how we can develop tightly in a loop so that the hypotheses that we have are actually fed into a working and functioning development pipeline all the way through the end of clinical trials. And I'm frankly not sure that pharmaceutical companies especially are set up to handle that yet.
Well, I agree with everybody. I'll just add on that I think Steve used a very key word there, which was access. So we all know, do we have enough data? Is it good data? Is it robust? Is all these things? One of the biggest challenges also in pharma and healthcare in general, unfortunately, is there's actually a lot of data out there. It's very siloed. And we're unfortunately disincentivized to share the data. Many of the pharma companies, many of the healthcare companies in general, they know that data is the new oil, that it somehow can be monetized, and even if they don't know what to do with it or can't use it, they don't want like their competitor somehow benefiting from their data. And so they're disincentivized to share. And that's actually become an impediment in getting enough data to train some of these AI systems. So some things that we actually could do, we are actually unable to do because of lack of access.
Yeah, I think on the topic of data quality, this is something addressed on almost a sort of daily basis. It's a continual kind of sort of bugbear sort of questions which gets raised, and do we have enough data to train this model, carry out this piece of analysis? And I think there's a lot of great work happening out there in the public, and also in companies that are generating their own data sets and how they sort of handle those internally. But definitely recognizing that there's a lot more to be done, and sort of recognizing programs where we're adopting good standards when it comes to ontologies, representations, information exchange, great initiatives, and especially we've seen this in the single cell space as well. There's a lot of large activities happening there. But I guess part of our kind of thinking as well at the moment is, to some extent, embracing some of these sorts of challenges head on, and where you can rely on different modalities of data, kind of integrating and trying to see if where you're seeing maybe kind of challenges or gaps, whether these can be completed if you're utilizing sort of omics information, different flavors of omics, how that can be aligned with information that's being extracted from literature data sets or pharmacology information as well. And if reinforcement can sometimes help with that hypothesis generation. Similarly, not just in the data aspect, but how you're actually utilizing that data in models. And again, if you have your models in some instances being trained with elements of noise built into this, it allows you to sometimes actually tease out what is the co-founders linked with those particular observations coming out, but also how you can actually sort of deal with elements of the quality of noise issues within. But there's a lot more work to be done. There's a lot more kind of effort externally, but also to some extent embracing the challenge head on is another way to be thinking about this.
Moving on from that a little, maybe it's about a usage of AI, it's specifically in the drug discovery arena. How much do you think will go into an innovation type pathway? How much into an automation? Or can they exist in the same space? Or will it be one or other, or a combination of the two? How do you see that going forward in the future?
I believe there is opportunities for innovation in all of those areas.
Mm-hmm.
I'm particularly intrigued about the opportunities for discovery. Pharma has been known to have long histories of accidentally stumbling into very promising opportunities. What if we're going towards a future in which actually the AI will be able to surface the next promising discovery by chance, just by leveraging the data that already we have and is continually fed into the industry? So discovery is one area that piques my curiosity and for possibility of value creation in the future. And then all the way through automation, though, I see a lot of opportunities there, especially as we go closer and closer towards the clinical trial end. And we already made some investments in those areas, in recruitment and monitoring. As mentioned before, 90% of clinical trials fails. And a lot of the reason why is that we don't have a good way to have a handle on the processes, on what patients are doing, on how physicians are surveilling, and we continue to do so in a very centralized manner. It's not fun. And so there is where I actually see more of the opportunities for automation. So both ends, discovery, and there is where I see the opportunity for innovation. And then on the automation side, instead, is mostly at the beginning of the clinical trial funnel all the way through until we have actually therapeutics proven working in the real world.
I agree. I think it's really going to be a combination, and it's going to be stepwise to a certain extent. Right? We're used to computers being about automation, and that's usually the first thing that I see people try when it comes to drug discovery. And as they do work, they look for optimization, and they ultimately look then for innovation. So, for example, there's a few companies that have been working on trying to improve the candidate-patient matching for the human clinical trials. And so they were looking to automate that process with AI to go through the candidate lists and all these things and the different kind of molecules. And as they automated this process, one of the things they started realizing from the data was, wait a second, we're still applying like very high level or kind of requirements, or still using big batches, I shouldn't say big batches, but just a handful of molecules. We know that people have different genomics, different biochemistry. If we were to actually take the knowledge we know about the candidate patients, could we tweak the molecules and tweak the dosage so the efficacy could potentially be greater based on their own, personal medicine or precision medicine? So they started actually looking at that. And that was kind of the light bulb moment. And so they actually started doing this, and they started actually seeing better results. And then that triggered the drug companies to realize, wait a second, is it possible that we abandon some drugs that might have actually been effective, maybe in a smaller population than we would have liked, because we just actually did poor, test candidate or patient candidate matching. So now they're actually going back and revisiting this using this new AI model. And I can't name names, one of the drugs was actually redone using this AI system, and the efficacy rate jumped to 80%. So I think that's a great example of automation eventually evolved into innovation.
Yeah, there's definitely a world where both innovation and automation still live together. And certainly from benevolent side, when we're thinking about, and very similar to what Martin was saying, this augmented view on top of discovery sort of processes, we have a very keen eye on what is the kind of the bleeding edge in machine learning, these activities, but also what can be readily applied within a discovery setting. And really without whether a hypothesis being generated in a target ID activity or a suggestion of a particular molecule in lead optimization, it needs the scrutiny of the domain expert. And what the tool and the platforms that we focus on really sort of tailoring is providing that information or providing that supporting evidence as to why a target has been suggested for a particular disease area of indication. In terms of this kind of automation step, putting all the engineering components, that is a big part. That all has to come together. Data needs to be ready. Models need to be run. That in itself, we've gone through a couple of iterations of building what we consider to be the best pipeline for that. But I'd say there's great opportunities in the automation, connecting that to the lab systems as well directly, and how we can actually readily improve validation much more rapidly, but still with this augmented view where domain experts, our researchers, discoverers are actually sort of really tied into that. I would also very sort of quickly add on that innovation cycle. This is something we do deal with on a regular basis as well, is how do we make sure that we are at the cutting edge of innovation, but at the same time not taking our eye off the ball of what we can actually utilize and apply right here, right now. And balancing that is often quite hard, creating that space. Quite often models which suggest molecules, these have been around for quite a while now, how you can truly apply these and use these in discovery settings, and evaluating frameworks, getting teams to stop work when you realize actually this is not something we can use in production systems, or this is something we can translate. And this innovation cycle is something we've been sort of really working with the teams to create that space, but also readily identify things that may not be quite right for the prime time. But
Maybe just slightly kind of paraphrasing, summarizing some of the points which I kind of wholeheartedly agree with. It's very important to know which tool to use at which point in time. It's very important to keep the human in the loop, to make sure that it's not just an automation or machine-driven decision, but there are very good reasons why human researchers, patient groups, doctors kind of are being involved. And that when combining these two things, the right tool and the right people driving it, that we can then see tremendous impact which goes beyond what is currently possible.
Thanks. Well, we're talking here now in this discussion panel, and one of the things that maybe we haven't covered up to now is the disruption part. Now, I've got a daughter who in the past was often sent home from school for being disruptive. It was never meant as a compliment. So where can we introduce AI to be most disruptive in the drug discovery pipeline in a beneficial way for drug discovery and getting drugs onto the market? Clearly, it's not all going to happen in one go. So where should we put our best bets on first, and why would that be?
I mean, what I find kind of most impressive about the AI drug discovery landscape is that there's more than 250 companies applying AI in one or the other part of the drug discovery funnel. There are companies that improve looking at scientific literature and identifying novel targets. There are companies that have models for generative chemistry to identify new molecules. There are companies that match existing molecules with new patient groups. There are companies that use AI to identify patients for clinical trials. There are companies using AI for real-world evidence. You can find someone applying AI for almost any problem in drug discovery. And that's a very good thing. Some of these innovations will indeed prove valuable and will become the standard of care and standard of research. Others will prove not to have been as effective as we hoped, and that's a completely normal process. Right now we're exploring how far this fundamental technology can take us, and I believe over the next few years we're going to see both a certain degree of consolidation within the AI space, as well as we're going to see which areas and which problems AI really is a useful tool for, and which other problems we have to find different tools for.
Yeah, I really recognise, the organisations, companies working in this space, and the way I've sort of certainly seen it over the last sort of 5 to 10 years is really thinking of the sort of classic chevron diagrams you always see of the drug discovery pipelines, from disease selection, target identification, validation, all the way through to the clinic. And what I've always considered where to be thinking about this, whether it's AI, machine learning, or just very good data science and analytics, there's slices where the data is there, the methods are developing, we've seen a bit of a perfect storm in compute technologies as well, and power sort of increasing to enable some of the activities that we couldn't do 20 years ago all happening. And it's those slices where we are actually being able to make a difference. And certainly when it's making predictive models in target identification space, and a rapid improvements in what we can do in chemistry. Again, we're seeing these, but also the further down the pipeline in the clinic. But this comes back to maybe that opening question around the data and the availability to make some of these informed decisions off the back of it, which is always probably that gatekeeper a little bit in what we can and can't do in certain areas, and how we can sort of mitigate wherever possible.
For sure. I think Martin actually summarized it really well. And Martin, I think you're totally spot on the data side. I think when it comes to disruption, obviously there's lots of opportunities across the board. But I think the biggest thing as an industry will be that if we can lower the costs enough and speed up the timeline to develop the drugs, we could actually make rare diseases profitable. I mean, there are things that we know we pass up because it doesn't make financial sense to pursue. So you think about people that have, we'll call it low volume diseases, now suddenly have an opportunity to get some sort of pharmaceutical treatment that might actually be beneficial for them. I think that's actually the biggest disruption we will hopefully be looking at in the near future.
Well, we have a say in the health technology industry: you can interact, but you cannot disrupt. VCs are always a few years late with respect to funders. They seem to know everything a few years ahead of us. But I see last year as sort of the peak of inflated expectations in this area, and now we're sort of trying to reassess what's the value, what's the role. I think we need to see that this field is cognizant of the fact that these are tools that are not meant to replace, but augment, supplement, help with the existing tools that are already out there, which is not going to be displaced anytime soon. And when we get real about how we can add utility to these existing processes, that's when we create real value. And that comes from actually being able to take those teams and that innovation that is perceived as a little bit outside of the pharmaceutical industry, embedded into the fabric of the pharmaceutical industries, in which I haven't still seen come to maturity, except for very noticeable exceptions, including those in this panel. So anyway, interaction it is what I think is the value more than disruption.
I'll go along with that all the way. The other thing is we now have the tools, or certainly many of the tools required for this are either established or becoming established. But one of the things that often holds things up is the people. Do you think they have the right culture, especially in big pharma, to introduce these sort of technologies, and will they pay any attention to them? What's the incentive for people to adopt them? Because you need the people to do the adoption before you can get into it. So what's your opinion on that one?
They're not ready.
Not ready.
No, well, for the most part. Actually, let me elaborate a bit. It's true across the ecosystem, actually. I see startups come to me, deeply technical team, computer science. What do you know about pharma? They don't have anybody on the inside. And conversely, I go to pharma, and what I see sometimes it's a real separation between the in vivo and the in vitro teams. And similarly, between those two, the startups and the pharmaceutical companies, there seems to be a barrier. So I feel like this ecosystem still has to find a way to really do partnerships. And I believe that, at least for AI in drug discovery startup ecosystems, if you are a very young startups, you are developing the most value either if you develop the assets or if you're really, really good at partnering early. Because to echo your point, data is right now mostly in large companies and pharmaceuticals. I feel that sometimes like I'm seeing a movie that I've already seen play in other sectors of health tech. 15 and 10 years ago, there was a wave of digital health, startups, deeply technical teams, and we're going to disrupt healthcare, and they built a layer of health delivery on top of the existing healthcare system or on the side of the existing healthcare systems. And healthcare organizations all of a sudden said, wait a minute, what's happening? We're going to be disrupted. And they started building teams of computer scientists and engineers inside. And then they came to realize that, okay, this is very expensive and we're not very good at it. And now after 15 years, we're actually finding a way for these two to come together. You're starting to see true partnership. You're starting to see teams with competencies that collaborate in a tight loop, both on the startup side and on the health tech side, and with them, with one another. I think this movie is playing out now in pharmaceutical companies. And I'm not sure where we are in the stage, and perhaps we will be faster getting to some practical and productive relationship. But we're just there, where large pharmaceutical companies are starting to hire troves of computer scientists to do this in-house. And meanwhile, technical teams outside are trying to understand what is really useful for pharmas to do, but mostly coming at it from technical prowess. But we'll get there. I guess we need to be optimistic and have a positive end note.
100% agree with you, Marta. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges when it comes to AI. It's really a marriage between the domain expert or business expert with the technologist. Some of the best AI solutions I've seen were really that combination. And you did a great job explaining that, so I won't belabor that point. But I think when it comes to the people side, yeah, there's the concern that some people are to be afraid about being, AI is going to take my job and some of these other things, and there's some natural resistance. But I think one of the biggest challenges we still face today is the trust. I don't think there's enough trust in the pharma industry yet on AI technology, which is why we're talking about people's lives, which is why even you do some of these things with an AI system, whether it's candidate molecule, patient matching, even data analysis, that they still want people to go in and do the review. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. We always need to do that check, but things that are more routine, even those, that trust is still lacking. And as a result, we don't have that faith in the technology. And part of this is just our societal culture. I mean, how many of you guys have seen a movie or read a book where there's the evil AI thing, but the humans rise, defeat it because we're more clever and all that kinds of things? Well, there are lots of things people are better than AI, and there are some things that AI are actually better than we are at, and we haven't quite reconciled that latter part yet. And I think that's still going to be an inhibitor in terms of adoption and just being able to move forward.
Yeah, for us and Benevolent's journey, it's been an interesting one, and maybe it's kind of like a little bit of a micro environment of what's being described here, because we initially sort of established as a technology sort of company. That was the underpinning around sort of maths, machine learning approaches, and over the course of time sort of brought on the capabilities. The sole focus was for the development of our internal pipeline and programs, and what data was needed, and then ultimately what experimental information was used for validation. As a consequence, we really sort of then build up, internally, big tech representatives, people coming from the likes of the Amazons and Googles, etc., but marrying that very closely with big pharma sort of capabilities, and again, the large pharma represented. And that in itself, it took a little while to figure out, how these two cohorts interacted, and expectations, timelines were very, very different when you're talking about an engineer's expectation very quickly turning around a solution to make a prediction, and again expecting this to be a drug from in a week's time, and the practical reality had to be explained. And then likewise from sort of discovery expertise as well, it's how to really kind of understand some of the limitations of data, how to interpret the the outcomes of some of these models that were being created, is this really answering my question? You know, the classic black box kind of situations. And again, it's taken a while, but how we can provide that sort of trust with our internal kind of users of the systems, get a reassurance that when the prediction is being made, it's being validated, they can sort of take that with them. And again, we're now deploying this. I'm working very closely with partners like AstraZeneca, and again, very much in a partnership mode is how we can work closely. But there is still a lot of learning, a lot of language, a lot of understandings and expectations that I think still need to be kind of understood on both sides. But it is a journey.
But I think the nice thing that we can see right now is that because AI drug discovery has now been used for a few years, we're reaching a point where more and more of the promises and predictions of what AI could be doing are becoming reality. The first drugs where AI played a significant role in its design, choice, and execution are now entering phase 1 clinical trials. And in the end, the ultimate proof for any technology in drug discovery is whether better drugs come out of it at the end. And that is kind of the point we're now reaching kind of with several molecules, several candidates. And that is kind of what I believe is a very interesting point in time, because once there's a widespread realization that certain promises were being made can indeed be kept, and that certain molecules that have been developed in 1 year as opposed to 5 years indeed perform as well or not even better in clinical trials, that I think is going to be an extremely strong signal for more and more pharma companies to acknowledge that and to engage with the companies who've made that possible.
I'm just thinking about the future for biotech. I mean, maybe I'm being a little sort of overgeneralizing here, but in the past, the value of biotech to big pharma often came in the value of the molecules that they were presenting. How do you think that's going to change in the future? Do you think biotech is going to become more valuable as tech rather than the bio part? And how do you think that might change? What's going to be the stimulus to change so it become more software driven perhaps?
That's a really interesting question, Steve. Because right now it's more of an outsourcing type of model where you have people like, Adam Wise will go, you're looking for something on this disease, Adam Wise will go, use their AI system, come back with some candidate molecules. And then, whoever, like I think Pfizer just bought some from them. I actually think this whole business model is going to become commoditized. I think, I actually shared this morning when I gave my talk about a company that they're actually building a platform where the average practitioner could actually use this technology and actually design their own molecules. And I think that's probably going to become the norm, because now it's not like I'm sending this off to this company, they're off in some black box doing whatever they're doing, they're coming back, hopefully the stuff works well, do all the testing. Now it's like my own people can actually go try their molecules, design it, get the ideas, run simulations, and do the work themselves. And I think if you're putting the hands now in lots and lots of people rather than just a select few within a company, I think that's really going to be, that's really the future, at least of molecule design, is turning this into more of a SaaS play.
I don't think so, Steve. Well, I think about, again, keeping with the analogy of the healthcare delivery organizations. Healthcare delivery organization, at some point, everybody questions, is the hospital going to be the new tech hub? But you know what? They're in the business of giving care. That's what they are. Like biotech is in the business of delivering drugs and vaccines. There was at some point expectations that with technology coming in, everybody was going to move into a very tech-heavy environment, and hospitals and care delivery organizations would be more and more as that. But in reality, they continue to be in the business of giving care. And technology, information technology, and technology has just been one of the tools that they have to continue to deliver care in response to the emerging and continuing changing needs of the market, of the patients. So I think that AI will be that, will be what information technology has been for healthcare delivery organizations. Just one more tool that they have in their toolkit in order to continue to do what they do best and be known as drug and vaccine generating organizations.
Yeah, I think one of the kind of experiences we've seen as well is how to build these sort of systems overall. And there's almost one of the things which, our experience is working with collaborators is thinking about sort of product frameworks, actually, who are the users around, who's utilizing this system, this process. And this has been one of these kind of key areas which I think actually the large pharma, larger organizations are sort of witnessing more of, and looking to bring how you actually build these systems internally, not just actually thinking about the components they can plug in, but it's how do we operate better, how do we sort of bring the right groups together, how do we think about cross-functional sort of teams and this delivery sort of mindset. And again, this is something that we witnessed and something we've actually proactively developed internally to build out the platform that we now have available. I probably also think for a longer term, the more productive interactions are these where it is more of a collaborative nature and less of a sort of SaaS offering. I think there's probably very key niche questions that can be answered by that, but when we're talking about drug discovery and other elements, it does require that interaction with collaboration, people very much involved, and not purely just outsourcing a particular question. So.
I would also say, I think drug discovery is one of these areas where there should be kind of a big disclaimer: don't try this at home. It really is. It's something which is genuinely hard to do. If it was easy, we would not have 95% failure rates with companies that have been doing drug discovery for more than 300 years. It's not because everybody is stupid, it's because it's genuinely hard. Human biology is extremely complex, and finding drugs that modulate a specific target, have a clinical effect without disrupting enough the rest of physiology too much, is not an easy thing to achieve. And that is why I believe it does indeed take the best people from many different fields to come together. From pharmacy, from engineering, from machine learning, from chemistry, from biology. It really is a team effort. And that is also the reason why I believe that having very close collaborative endeavors between pharma companies and more technology-oriented companies can indeed provide the highest chance of success.
Thanks very much. Well, we've come to the end of the panel discussion where I've been feeding them with questions, but it's now time maybe to throw it out to the audience. Has anybody got any burning questions they'd like to in the last 8 or 10 minutes or so? Sure.
Sorry.
Did you just wait for the microphone? Thank you.
For Marta, Mark, and the panel, what are some of the near-term opportunities you recognize for translating a massive machine learning-driven hypotheses around molecules and targets to developmental outcomes for pharmaceutical trials? Could be in reducing that failure rate or increasing efficiency in some way. And are there any particular tools from companies or organizational models that you see approaching this?
Well, from my perspective, I've seen perhaps too many AI and drug discovery companies, and not enough attention instead to what those new molecules are feeding into. Anything from trial design, patient recruitment, monitoring of patients in clinical trials, connecting to real-world evidence in real time in a very close iterative loop. So if I were to start a company today, if I were that nuts today, I would actually just focus on that. And I see these developments that are happening from the AI and drug development industry as my opportunity, because as I mentioned at the beginning, I think there's going to be a wave of interesting hypotheses to test in a process that is still deeply malfunctioning. And so industry is going to have to get better. That they should have done it 5 years ago. And in 5 years from now, it's going to be even more daunting because we're going to have even more hypotheses to test on even smaller populations that have specific and indications for rare diseases and the frontier of personalized medicine. So if I were to start a company today, that's what I would start. And that's what I frankly see too few companies, given the size of the opportunity that's out there and the possibilities that automation can bring to this front.
Thank you.
I was going to say, maybe adding on what we see, the potential sort of failures out there in the press around when programs have gone wrong. It's normally where they've started, and ultimately the wrong target's been selected to begin with, and that kicks off a whole chain of events which ultimately kind of unravel at a later point. And how we can reduce these kind of situations is where a lot of the companies are actually focusing a lot of their efforts. And this actually just comes back to the foundational data and information that kicks off that initial analysis, what's being sort of highlighted, disease selections, all of these different avenues. I think in terms of very specific technologies and areas of interest, it is in the patient data spaces how we can do better jobs of bringing together just both the omics information and clinical data matched up with individuals and really at the start to really sort of help sort of drive understandings, better understandings, molecular characteristics of disease and how this is manifesting. And this is really kind of a driving area which we don't see enough of at the moment. And I guess it's more maybe a data play, and then how that then actually sort of translates into the types of algorithms that actually then make predictions for target identification. And again, this would be kind of key areas that we need to do better as an industry and researchers as well, making that information available.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else got a question? Last couple of minutes. One over there, thank you. Just wait a second.
Hi, as an outsider from the field, is there such a difference anymore between biotech and pharma?
There was a panel earlier today that made that distinction. I mean, if you look at the markets, a lot of them actually think that they expect the pharma companies to actually basically buy out all the biotech companies, but we actually haven't seen that materialize either. So that's always the big question, why is that happening? And I think to some degree the big pharma companies are looking more at I'll call it like an outsourcing type of model now. It's much like as we build planes, Boeing or Airbus doesn't build the whole plane anymore. They outsource the wings to one area, the engines to another, and they become the integrators. And I think that's what pharmas actually look at themselves now, and that they can actually be the ultimate, I'll call it drug integrator, and outsource the other pieces that they need.
I guess it's a bit like being the world's shortest giant.
Yeah.
Anybody else got a question? Over there.
Hi, so I actually organized the same panel with Martin in 2017, but that was 5 years ago. So what's the number one highlight in the last 5 years? I don't know if that's a vague question as well, but it's interesting because I think we discussed a lot of similar topics at the time.
By the way, that's Livia, the CEO of Nucroot, and if you're running a clinical trial, you should get to her soon. We're investors.
Other clinical trial companies are available.
We can have two thoughts. So one is if we look at the number of companies that work in the AI drug discovery space 2017 to today, there is a massive increase in the number of technologies, number of companies, number of researchers, number of publications. Anything involving kind of AI and drug discovery has seen a tremendous growth over these years, which is a very good thing because this means more ideas are getting tried out, more companies try to innovate, far more funding has gone into this space in the last 5 years than people could have imagined in their wildest dreams in 2017. So there's definitely been an amazing story of growth in the space, which again is a very good basis for us to now see which of these many approaches will indeed kind of work out or not. And we've also seen tremendous advances in making these things a reality. Partnerships between large AI-driven companies and pharma companies over the past few years have reached kind of enormous kind of sizes. For example, Recursion and Roche Genentech, a $12 billion deal. That was just unimaginable in 2017.
I'll just add one thing that I think the advancements that Martin's actually been talking about has impressed the need to actually make more data available to all these companies. And I think you're seeing more organizations, including the United Nations now, making that push to try and get that data, as much of it as possible, actually available for the companies to use. Because they know that we're all stuck without that. Data is the fuel for AI. And so like the World Health Organization, in partnership with some of the big companies, have pushed this notion of a health database consortium that, stripped of PI, let's get people to voluntarily share their data in this repository so that then all the companies, the clinical researchers, all these people can actually access that. And hopefully, that will accelerate health advances. The challenge is still, like I talked at the beginning, people don't want to share.
I would just like to briefly kind of second that because up until 2 or 3 years ago, even the term fair data, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, didn't even exist. And by now, funding bodies, the UN, companies, everybody talks about data has to be fair and has to be kind of a tool that people can use across boundaries of companies, organizations, countries for a common purpose. And that is a very, very good development.
I mean, one thing which obviously everyone's been aware of and caught up with is the pandemic side of things. And one lesson learned from that is actually the impact of elements of the data sharing which actually came out of this. There was a lot of proactive generations, sharing, making this available, removing restrictions, and as a consequence, we moved rapidly as an industry to better understand what was happening, making suggestions around vaccines and repurposing opportunities, which had a much more rapid impact than we've probably seen in any disease sort of causing sort of situation. And if examples like this, if the industry can actually target other disease areas as well, it would be quite a rapid change we would see there. But that's something that we've witnessed, gone through, and maybe just one sort of positive outcome from the last 2 years, which we've had to all go through.
Well, in view of time, as I think we're right on schedule, I'd like to invite you all to join with me in thanking the panelists for a really very interactive and a very entertaining and interesting discussion. So thank you very much indeed, everybody.